Hey everyone, it's Ashley. Welcome back to another installment of Lovely Layering with Ashley. We are so close to the recent release of the new Crafty flower, which is the monthly subscription that Altenew has just come out with, and I thought that I would dive into layering dies a bit and how we can create different looks with them. They're obviously a little bit of an investment, so I wanted to show you how you can really stretch your supplies there. This particular set has 5 layers that create one flower. It creates 2 leaves that each have 2 layers, and there are 2 stem dies included, and these stem dies can be layered one on top of the other to create a little bit more dimension, but also you can use them separately just to create a little bit difference of height and width so that the stems don't look identical. I'm using 2 packs of gradient cardstock today. One is shades of purple and one is green Meadows. And I'm also using my mini blossom die cutting machine, which the cardstock was created to fit perfectly in. So as you can see, I have my A plate here that's down on the mat. I'm going to choose my cardstock, and I always work from my first layer to my last layer. So the first layer is usually the lightest, but there is a layering guide, which I will link here in the description so that you can have a better idea. This is my first layer die that I know from the layering guide, so I'm going to go ahead and put it on top of that cardstock, which is right on top of plate letter A. I'm then going to take the metal shim, which is created also for the mini blossom, and you can see me sort of wonky in the reflection there, and then I'll put my B plate on top of that. Now I always use A as my cut plate, so A as my bottom plate, and then B as my top plate. One thing you'll definitely want to make sure that you do is make sure that you don't put the metal shim down on top of your cut plate before you put the paper down. The dies will wear away at that metal shim, and it can really shorten the life of it and leave impressions in your cardstock. So you always want to make sure that you use your you use your metal shim on top of your die. So I'm continuing on here. I've got the next color in the shades of purple, which is Lavender Fields, and I'm using the second die to cut that out. It's got the same basic shape with a few cutouts in there so that the lighter color really shows through on a few of those petals. This is my third die in the set, so I've gone with the next color, which is Deep Iris. And again, just to reiterate a little bit more, I'm going to put the metal shim on top of the die, so it's basically on the back side of the die. A lot of times I will get questions, or I will hear people saying that their metal shim is really wearing away or it's leaving impressions on their cardstock, and it's very likely that it's because you're using it underneath your die so that the die actually cuts into the shim, which will definitely lessen the life of your metal shim. So here's the 4th layer of my flower, which is the Midnight Violet, and I actually will revisit the last layer of the flower with a different color cardstock in just a moment. But first we're going to jump into die cutting the leaves. Now you can see here on the layering die, it will actually show you which dies should be used with a lighter or darker cardstock. Now you could of course switch this up if you're looking for a different look, but the layering guides are there just basically to guide you to say this was the intended look. Of course, being creative and crafty, you take your own discretion, but it does just give you that guide that you could follow if you so choose. So I have decided to follow the guide. I'm going to go with a lighter color, which is the minty green for those first layers, and then I'm going to choose just green, which is that mid-tone there for the accent layers. Now I'm going back to that 5th layer of the flower, which are the stamens, I think they're called. I'm never quite sure, but I'm using a black cardstock so that it really shows through. I'm not exactly 100% sure which or what color these lily stamens usually are, but I have just an image in my mind that they're black. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and use. To adhere these together, all of the layers together to make it look like one cohesive flower, I'm going to use glue. Glue is the easiest for me because you can get it in these tiny little spaces and they will get even smaller as the layers go on. But one thing I want you to notice is that I always pick up the layer that I am adhering and I use the glue on the back of that layer. If you use it on the larger layer, you may be adhering or putting glue where the layer doesn't sit. And then you'll have extra glue and then you get some little pilling of the paper or of the glue itself, and it just doesn't look as clean. So always remember, at least in my opinion, putting the glue on the back of the layer that you're actually adhering works best every time. So after I've put all of my layers together, you can see I've cut out both of the stems. Now, like I said, you can see that you could actually put that smaller stem on top of the larger one, but I choose not to. I just want to use this one layer for the stem, and then it creates this really beautiful blooming lily. To add this to a card, I decided to use it as the focal point in addition to the Mega Alpha die, and I've used the letter T. This is going to be a monogrammed card that I'm sending to a friend of mine, and it's for their birthday, so it says celebrating you today. I've also used the Dodex Star cover die just to create a little bit of dimension there on the actual card front, and then I adhered it all with foam tape to an A2 card base. Now moving on to a different medium that you can use for these layering dies. This is a little more artsy. You can take a little bit more liberty with colors that you use, and I'm going to be pulling out my artist watercolor set from Altenew. If you've been watching any of my videos recently, you know that this is my new obsession, so I had to take it out for the video today. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my watercolors by using my distress sprayer, and I'm just making sure that all of the pans get wet. I'm then going to take a half piece of the watercolor paper from Altenew, and I'm using some clean water just to dab a space on the actual watercolor paper. I'm using that yellow color, which is Pocket Full of Sunshine, with a little tiny bit of the Summer Morning orangey yellow color right next to it. And I'm just creating this wet on wet wash of color in this corner of the paper. Now I'm going to speed this up a little bit just so that you can see it without having to wait for the entire color to come together, but basically I want a nice bright color. I'm going to end up changing the color completely for the next few layers, so I really want this one to shine through. I'm repeating this process in the sort of center right hand side, and I'm using Tea Party and Red Cosmos to create this really light pinkish red color, and if it's ever getting a little bit too dark, you can absolutely add some clean water and that will lighten it up for you. Now on the bottom left hand side, I'm using those same colors, Tea Party and Red Cosmos. I'm just using more saturation, so I'm making it more vibrant and definitely darker. Up there on the top right, that's going to be for my final layer, or actually my fourth layer, and I use shades of purple for that. To give it a little bit more of an artsy vibe, it's not always extremely noticeable, but I really like to add this little touch. I use some white gouache and I water it down. I'll pick it up with a nice big fat paintbrush and then I tap it on another paintbrush. I'm using an open pen here, which is possibly one of the worst ideas. It could totally ruin this entire paper, but do as I say, not as I do. And so just by tapping my paintbrush there, I get tiny little bits of splatter, and that will just make it look a little bit more artsy, like I said. Because this is all on the same piece of watercolor paper, I can use all the different layers of the dies right away. I don't have to put it through several times. And here you can kind of see the different layers and those different colors come together. It's something that looks very different from what I had created before with the gradient cardstock. But I love that this technique, this watercolor technique, makes it possible for you to choose your own colors. So I'm adhering this second layer to the first layer with foam tape this time, and I'm doing this just by using a nice big foam tape roll and just cutting tiny little pieces of the foam tape off. Now I get that dimension, this extra sort of pop up between this second and first layer. The next two layers are fairly skinny, and I think that it would be almost too much dimension to put another layer with foam tape and then finally another layer with foam tape. So I'm using glue for the rest of the layers on the flower. So you can see the different look. It still looks like the same flower, but you get a little bit of a softer appearance. You get that little pop-up look if you're going to use foam tape, which of course you can do with the gradient cardstock as well, but I really love the way that this one came all together. I kept this one extremely simple, and I used some black cardstock to create a really simple, dark, and striking card. I hope that you've enjoyed the video and learning a bit about how I like to stretch my supplies in this layering die set. As always, links to all of the products are in the description. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye.